there's reactions occurring. So, and throughout the entire solar system, we have vast quantities of change, even in these last 8 years. But in total, perhaps these last 45 or 50 years is a better time to look at it all. And the situations that have occurred relative to our knowledge of the planets seems to indicate that while our knowledge is going up due to the number of things we've got out there sampling for us, at the same time, we've become aware of another pattern in that the climate change is accelerating on all these planets. And we know that the rate of our growth of knowledge is not actually producing this effect. In other words, the climate change has not always been there. It's really accelerating. The climate change may indeed be a function, since we're in basically what amounts to an electromagnetic illusion of a solid universe. The climate change throughout the whole solar system could be explained by, if you will, a tightening level of magnetics that's occurring within our solar system itself. Whatever the root cause of those tightening magnetics, sort of our big squeeze theory, or language which we've had for a number of years, the more you pressure a magnetic containment vessel with outside magnetic lines, the more the thing heats up. And that appears to be the effect that we're having all over the solar system. Whether locally it's being produced as on Earth as extreme cold in some areas, and so on. A lot of that's related to moisture. In areas like in Mars, for instance, we're getting a situation showing up where it's much more indicative of what really happens. The lower amount of moisture on Mars has allowed us to see a more distinct warming trend from what I think of as this large squeeze coming from the sun. And coincidentally, probably very meaningfully, the sun has been without sunspots in any kind of a real fashion for a number of months. In fact, the longest we've ever observed. And the sunspots that we have had have been really strange in the sense that they appear, they're little tiny spots, and then they disappear extremely rapidly, whereas we're used to a much longer duration of sunspots. And if our theory of magnetic squeeze is correct, then basically what's happened is the rotational delta, the difference between the speed of rotation of the sun's equator and the speed of rotation of the sun at the pole, has over time, these last 11,802 years now, gotten us to a point where the magnetic lines of flux around the sun are all twisted around themselves, and they've like packed down around the sun the way yarn would be wound down around like a croquet ball, until the yarn from the two poles, so to speak, on your croquet ball meets in the equator. And that, we think, is basically what's occurring. And at some point that's going to break, probably produce a giant bulge of magnetic release, which may flip our internal magnetically sensitive plasma core within the planet Earth, and thus trigger a magnetic flip, and then, north to south poles actually flip.
I want to pick up on that. We come back from the break, because I do want to talk about the flip and coastal shiftage. Stay tuned, everybody. More with Clif after a word from these sponsors. Joining us tonight on the Common Sense Show is Clif from the WebBot. And Clif is, we went to the break, and we're also joined by Annie. I wanted to mention that you were talking about a flip, and you're talking about a complete pole shift of a magnetic shift going from north to south. What kind of rotation shift will we get? Will it be 1%, 3%, 4%?
No, the historical mean appears to be about 30% in a shift of the continents. The issue is the following. It's really curious, for instance, that everybody thinks we live on a sphere, and we don't really. It's what's called an oblate spheroid, and so we're fatter. The Earth is fatter at the middle than it is at the poles. So if you were to take the diameter of the Earth at the poles, you get a difference versus the equator. You get a total difference of almost 26 miles, which, of course, since we're in a 26,000-year, the number 26 just keeps coming up and up. Precession cycle distance from the galactic equator is 26,000 light years, and so on. Nonetheless, there's this 26-mile bulge around our equator, 13 miles on each side. And so that bulge prevents the continents from shifting around. It's kind of like the key to the whole system, because it locks the water mass and the centrifugal force and all these other forces together. If the magnetic shift occurs the way that it has potential to, what happens is that the poles in the plasma reverse, and as they reverse, they generate a lot of friction, and to a certain extent, it kind of like pressurizes the internal part of the Earth a bit, and the plates, if you will, it'd be kind of like a crust on a balloon, and you just give a little bit more pressure on the balloon, and the crust starts to separate on its natural fracture lines. At that point, the potential exists for the bulge on the Earth to go away as the plasma within the center of the Earth flips. When that occurs, the crust can shift. But the bulge only goes away for a brief period of time. For that brief period of time, when the rotation slows enough that the centrifugal force is parted, but it is still maintained in the law of angular momentum conservation. It's just shifted to where we end up in our new rotation, and then it picks up again and a new bulge forms. In the past, if you'll consult writers such as Hapgood or Hancock or any of the others who have messed about with this stuff, they seem to agree that we travel about 2,000 to 3,000 kilometers in our rotation on the surface of the Earth relative to the shift itself. So, for instance, if we were going to go north, where I'm at may shift 2,000 miles to the north and end up on the other side of the Arctic Circle, where Siberia is at the moment. Does that sort of make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so...
Do you see this as a 2012 scenario?
Certainly.
Okay.
The reason I say that is because of Maurice Cottrell, is this very interesting researcher who discovered all these kinds of hidden references inside the Mayan glyphs. I mean, thousands of repetitious, very unique numbers. These numbers exist in nature at the level of, say, the frequency vibration of hydrogen, which is a known universal standard. And so if you find a space alien and you need to communicate, you can always start with the frequency vibration of hydrogen, because hydrogen vibrates at the same frequency whether they're in their home planet or ours. It's a starting off point. And these numbers are hidden within the Mayan sculptures and glyphs. They're not really all that hidden, but they are obscured because they really wanted to pass on information, and they wanted to do it in such a way that it wasn't out and about and didn't cause a different view of the information to arise. It would be very easy to take this information and not look at it the correct way. Maurice Cottrell found this information. Patrick Garrell, this other writer and researcher, refined that level of information and corrected some of the errors in Maurice Cottrell's thinking. Maurice Cottrell wrote such things as the Mayan prophecy, the Tutankhamun prophecy, and so on. And see, here's an example of it. The Giza pyramid is in the main pyramid in the Giza plateau, the big bugger there that everybody thinks is associated with Pharaoh Cheops or Cheops. And so they've named it that. It is aligned on a north-south axis that is just phenomenally accurate. We cannot align buildings as accurate today as that one is aligned. Yet, even though they had that level of precision, the sides of the pyramid are not the same. In other words, the north-south, the sides that face north and south are the same to each other, but they are different from the sides that face east to west. And the difference between those two is exactly the same representational, irrational number that is the difference between the North Pole measurement of the Earth, the polar measurement of the Earth versus the equatorial. So they were encoding some information. They were saying, we know that that we live on an oblate spheroid, not an actual sphere. We know about the equatorial bulge, and here's proof of it. We are putting it in this big pyramid so you can't mistake it. And you just keep going on and on and on about these kind of things. For instance, there is a measurement called an Egyptian inch. If you start at a particular point that everybody accepts as valid, and you count the number of inches in the Cheops pyramid, and you make one Egyptian inch equal a year, guess when it ends? The little tunnel ends in the year 2012. And so you find that there, and then you go and you find the same thing kind of in the Mayan pyramids and their glyphs, only they took a much more direct route. Their pyramid city of the universe, which has the pyramid of the sun and the pyramid of the moon, also has in it buildings that are at the exact level in a ratio between the building and the pyramid of the sun as are the planets of our solar system and our sun. So they're saying each of these buildings represents one of the planets. And you start looking at all these kinds of numbers, and you see that they knew about this delta of difference between the rotation of the equator of the sun and the sun's poles.
We're going to have to hold it right there, Cliff, as we go to the break. When we come back, I want to talk about what this means for us here on planet Earth. Stay tuned, everybody. More with Cliff on the other side. Welcome back, everybody. You're joined by Dave and Annie. We're co-hosting the Common Sense Show tonight. Our very special guest is Cliff from the WebBot. And Cliff, as we went to the break, we were going to talk about what this is going to mean for all of us with regard to this magnetic shift that's coming in 2012.
Yeah, if you want to go to our site at halfpasthuman.com and scroll down about, just a little bit below a presentation page, you'll find a link for some of the material that we've been discussing and some graphics that illustrate it a lot better than I can describe it. But basically for the United States or North America, there's sort of two possibilities. There appears to be, and we've looked at this, I've gone through and I've looked at the information from previous pole shifts as it's able to be found, and there's actually tons of it out there, regardless of when you assign these pole shifts. If you just take the time factor out of it and look at the number of times that it's occurred, you see that there's certain clustering that occurs as the magnetic pole and the geographic pole merge and then separate later after the shift. And so I've made some conclusions, which may be valid. One of them appears to be that the location of the Giza Plateau is very significant because that appears to be the center of the land masses at the current stage. Yes. And it has also apparently been the point of rotation around which the planet has shifted these last three rotational periods. So since we still have these land masses, if Australia disappeared or Asia suddenly grew a new arm out into the Pacific or something, it would alter the balance of where the centrifugal force is going to tug and so on. But at the moment, it appears that if we get the equatorial bulge to release and we become a sphere again, which is the point at which we can slip around, then we'll slip around the equatorial or the Giza Plateau as our point of rotation. The last two times we've done that, we've rotated in a particular direction, so to speak, but the time before that we rotated the exact opposite. So if we just were to assume we would continue in that same level of rotation, then it would have Canada moving down towards where Mexico is now, if we were to continue the same kind of direction as before. But that would be 3 times rotating in the same direction.
What period of time would this happen over when Canada shifts to Mexico?
Maybe as little as 40 or 50 hours.
Because it leads to a question I have, and I think this speaks to the impact of what this means for all of us. If this does indeed come to pass, as you're indicating it might, I remember reading about a woolly mammoth that was found encased in ice, totally out of its environment in Siberia, with undigested vegetation in its stomach, and it's been theorized it was part of the last pole shift. Do you know anything about that?
Sure. There's tons of information that goes